The main thing is patterns. It's not just the data points, but your supermarket knows you're pregnant before you do
Oh,
because they
yes.
see your patterns change. Your
Right.
Facebook knows when you're depressed because of the images that you're putting. There is research about how different profile pictures, colors, if somebody's in depression or not. Do
There
you know
was
if
a
you're going
study,
through?
I just want to throw this in, but there was a study and it was US based, but credit card companies know 23 months before you do if you're getting a divorce because of habit changes and pattern changes. These have been studied. It's not occasional instances. So when you talk about patterns, you're not just talking about, oh, this person likes Taylor Swift or Chris Stapleton. You're talking about patterns of
It means, yeah.
things that are leading indicators of something that you do or that is going to happen to you that you don't even know yet because you don't realize you're in a pattern. Hello and welcome to the Smarter Online Safety Show. I'm your host, Jocelyn King, the queen of online safety. Hello and welcome to the Smarter Online Safety Show. I'm your host, Jocelyn King, the Queen of Online Safety, and I am here today with the Mr. Wolf of Operations. For over 20 years, Roy has brought science grade investigative tools to global cyber operations and fraud investigations across over 30 countries. And in the industry, he is called the Mr. Wolf of Operations. You know, he's that guy that the executives, consultants, and private equity firms call when their numbers don't add up and their livelihoods are on the line. So when a company is bleeding assets, or when cross-border, merger and acquisition deals have skeletons to find, traditional auditors rely on data sampling. But Roy says that the sampling data is like digging random holes to find a body. I love that. It rarely works, and especially against sophisticated fraud manipulation. So to solve this, he has spent years in stealth building POVA.ai or POVA, and he'll talk about that. A private intelligence tool that analyzes billions of operational data points to map the exact reality on an organization. So he's seen a lot of fraud and everything else, and he looks at business from millions of different angles. And he's got some incredible stories to share with us, including finding anomalies. Like he says, it's like finding cat DNA inside a fish cell. So we're going to have to talk to him about that. So welcome, Roy.
Hi,
So great
thank
to
you
have
for
you
having me.
here. Yeah, and I love that you're called the Mr. Wolf of Operations. So for our listeners who have not seen Pulp Fiction, can you explain that reference so they know what that means?
Yeah, thanks. Actually, I heard it from somebody who called me that, and then I had to go and see the movie again, that section, to figure out exactly how good
Right,
or how bad it is.
right.
I'm usually very calm, and I go to very complex and like politically very disturbed organizations,
Hmm.
and I have to come and help them sort out the big mess, especially when there is fraud involved or a lot of different uncertainty, and there's like billions of rows of data, and nobody can really understand what's going on there.
Right,
And yeah, so it's a very loaded environment. So
right.
I come there and to get them answers as soon as possible, and then they can do whatever they need to do with it.
That's great. And if you haven't seen Pulp Fiction, the iconic Tarantino movie with John Travolta and Uma Thurman and stuff, Mr. Wolf comes in when there is literally somebody's blood is on the back seat and it's got to get cleaned up. And he comes in. And what is so great about Mr. Wolf is he doesn't get in there and clean it all up himself. He says, "You're going to do
Yeah.
this and you're going to do that," and he makes order out of chaos. So it's a great it's a great name to be given. It speaks a lot to how people regard you. Everyone who gets into our line of work has a reason and an event that triggers it. So tell us a bit about yourself and how you got into this interesting line of work.
Um, well, I started as an independent security researcher, let's call it like
Hmm.
that. And I was always interested in going to very complex environments and trying to figure out how everything works. And a lot of times, everybody has their own like specific point of view. And when you have to come as an outsider and figure out everything, how everything works, that's very, very complex. And I did it from a lot of different angles, from cybersecurity point of view. And later, I was dedicated myself to help solve problems with safety in industrial facilities
Mm-hmm.
and warehouses. I had cameras that would look at how people work and try to alert in real time about unsafe behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
To, or for example, if somebody walks in a chemical factory and if they fall down, so the camera is actually smart enough to help because it sees somebody falling on the floor and not moving.
Right.
And I was really excited about these things. And then I saw that all my analysis of what happened in that facility gets rejected because people would just report something totally different.
Oh,
So
interesting.
I had
So
to find ways
there's what
to
happened and what gets reported are two
yeah,
different things.
let's say they would say there was one incident
Uh-huh.
and my camera saw 10 incidents.
Interesting.
And they were refusing to accept that sensors were the truth and a camera cannot lie. And I had
So
to
you're
find
a bit of
ways.
a data detective in a way.
Yeah, I had to find ways to prove that yeah, these numbers are correct and
Mm,
what people are reporting is questionable in terms of statistical anomalies and things like that. So this I got
mhm.
into uh, uh, trying to prove fraud through algorithms.
Okay. Wow, that's interesting. So you've seen some crazy stories, I'm sure, and we'll get to those in a second. So if you explain your work to someone at a kitchen table in one or two sentences, what would you want them to understand about how easily systems can be fooled, like the ones you were just talking about? Like, what is it about your line of work that the average person doesn't know?
Well, many years ago, everybody told organizations that they must collect data because if they collect data, they will understand better how their business works. They'll have an advantage. They'll have, strategical advantage about better than anybody else. And then they started collecting data, and they collect thousands of millions of billions of records, and they have no idea what to do with it. And they're choking on data.
Hmm.
So they make some pretty dashboards and they can see, specific pictures from their data, but they have no idea what's going on inside the data. Especially now with the era of AI, they start collecting even more data because this data might be valuable. So a lot of data that would have been just
Hmm.
thrown away a day later now is kept and sold, which is a
Hmm.
huge problem for anonymity, which
Right.
doesn't exist anymore.
Right. So
And
our data percolates. We that's a theme on this show. We talk a lot about how, you give your data to one company or you don't even give it to them. They acquire it and then how it's shared through the whole supply chain and ecosystem. It's like you've published it, all your details publicly out there for a lot of organizations to find and know about.
now it's even much worse than it used to be because before, for example, your phone is selling your location about like 100 times a day,
Right.
up to like 10 meters.
Right.
And before that, people use it for marketing, but then after a day, it just expires because, nobody used it or nobody bought it and then it expired.
Mhm.
But today, because of AI models, you can back for anybody, uh, like a month, 2 months, a year back. And the only way they can do it is because they tell people it's anonymized data. So it doesn't say your name or your device. It just says like some random ID. But even if there is one that ID can be associated with your name, there's no anonymity.
Right.
So
As
if
yeah,
if
so
something happened on your phone and you mention your name or email or something and you associate it with that ID, then
mhm.
anything can be traced back after that.
So let's double click on that for a minute. So for people who listen to this podcast, they're people who care about safety and privacy, and of course being smarter online with all of this. What advice do you have for what should people be doing to get the most amount of privacy? Like you said, anonymity is gone, but there's levels of it. So how can you maximize your privacy and your anonymity with all of this being a reality today?
Well, it's very hard.
Hmm.
Uh, but at least if you want to have a meeting that is not going to be obvious, then don't take your phone. It was able you were able 20 years ago to detach the battery from the phone. Today you even can't do that in a lot of so it's always on.
So if you don't want
And
location settings, um, you know,
you
tracked
have so
about
many
you for
apps.
a
You
variety
have
of
so
reasons, personal and work
Yeah,
related, and for your personal,
yeah.
you really have now. So some people would say, well, can't I just turn my phone off?
What do you mean turn it off? Clicking
Okay.
the off button doesn't mean it's off.
Power it down. So a lot of people think that if they power down their phone, that then they're invisible.
I don't know if they actually power it down. Just because the screen becomes blank, I don't know if the microphone is not working. I don't know if, you
Right.
know, just
Well, and I think
because,
the thing is, even if the microphone, let's just say the microphone, best case scenario, the microphone's off, but your location is still being connected
yeah.
to cell
But
towers. Hmm.
if your phone can sell your location,
Hmm.
do it.
Hmm. It
And
will.
not just, yeah, not just from, browsers that get your location, but all of the apps, like GPS access, and they can pinpoint your location for like 10 meters or even less. And the problem with that is that if you have another person with you, for business or whatever, and their phone is next to yours, then it's a meeting. You can trace that back a
Mm.
year back. All you need is one point in time where you become not anonymized to this phone ID.
Right. And then
Uh,
it's kind of like then it places that sign on you and you can't get rid of it. It's now
yeah,
it's
yeah.
tracing you through everything, which,
Because
and that's
I
like
remember,
saying it only takes one time to get tagged and then then you're visible everywhere when you're trying to be invisible.
it's even worse than that because let's say it's night and you're sleeping. Where are you sleeping? Where is your phone at 2 a.m.?
Well, for most people, it's right next to them in their bed.
Okay, so if I go to the like records of phone, pings or selling your data, and I look at where people are at 2 a.m., I know where they live
Right.
or where they work or where they
Yeah.
eat lunch or who they meet with.
Hmm.
And if I trace your phone with all the phones around you and the phones around them, I can immediately know, who's connected to investigators, who's connected to media, who's connected to.
Right.
You can trace everything. It's
Well,
just
you bring up a great point because that's one of the things that, in particular, AI is really good at helping organizations with is identifying patterns. So if you have two or three times that you're in the same place at 2 a.m., it doesn't, that's an automated function to just be able to know that and sell that information. I think it's particularly important because, I work with a lot of people who want privacy because let's say they're in a lawsuit or they're going through a messy divorce or they're, escaping domestic violence or they've had death threats against them or or they're a leader at a large company, like the incidents that have gone on in the US with the healthcare CEO who was shot. There are reasons why there are legitimate and valid reasons why people need to keep privacy for even physical safety. And then
yeah.
you add to that like there's a lot of single women or older people who are more vulnerable who don't want everybody to know everything or know when they're alone or at home or traveling. So this brings
Mhm.
up a whole issue about how can people be safer in this modern age because let's talk about this for a second because your physical safety, it used to be in cybersecurity there was cyber online, online related
Mhm.
security, and there was physical security, and there was a clear
Yeah.
line between them, and that line blurred easily, 10, 15 years ago, and it's gone today pretty much. I mean there's very little physical safety that doesn't involve online somehow. I mean, even if you left your phone behind and you're walking through the park or downtown, you're on digital cameras. And a lot of those cameras have technologies to even identify who you are. I've walked through, um, you know, cities in China where I walk into a building and they tell me my name, my age, my weight, and I don't even open a word and you could have no ID on you and they can still do that. So,
Yeah.
and that capability exists worldwide. So, obviously bad guys want to stay anonymous and I think that's the biggest thing that I hear from, good average citizens is, they just want to feel safe. They don't want to feel like they're, in hiding. But
Mhm.
there's kind of a blurred line right now about hiding and and insisting on having the highest level of privacy you can have, in the sense that you kind of have to demand it, because you're opted in whether you like it or not to sharing all this information, and
Yeah. Yeah.
you've got to do unnatural acts of going into settings and everything to take steps to protect yourself. Is that right?
Yeah, I think going to through there's apps, there's services for that, like to go through different data brokers and just removing
Hmm.
yourself from there. That's
Oh,
one
and let's
point.
talk
And
about
you
that.
can never
Let's
really,
talk about that, because we haven't
yeah,
spoken about data brokers a lot on this show in the time we've been live. So a lot of people don't understand what a data broker is. They understand that they get an alert that their information is on the dark web, and they understand that's a bad thing. But the legal business of data brokerage is a huge issue for people and their privacy and anonymity, and it is legal, and especially in the U.S. I know you've worked across 30 countries. You live
yeah.
overseas now, and you grew up overseas from a U.S. perspective. Tell us what is going on with data brokers, so that people really understand Data Broker 101.
Uh, when you sign up with a company and you trust them and you give them something about your data, your picture, something about your habits, something about your the way you do things, they have specific things that they can do with your data.
Hmm.
And you think that they will not do things that will look really bad on them. So, you expect your parking garage not to sell your data to a porn site,
Right.
because
You would hope.
if it's going to be, or a dating site,
Right.
because you know that if it was found out, they would feel really bad, and it's not going to make them look good. So they'll probably want to do it for the small amount of money that your data is worth.
Hmm.
But once they like whitelist it, or they go through a data broker, then they sell it to like a bank of data, or through a
Hmm.
bank of data, and then anybody can buy it.
Right.
So there are some regulations. For example, if you want to get advertising data to use it to track people and to know where they live, it's against like the terms of use. But if
Hmm.
somebody wants to do something to you, or they want to investigate you, they don't care about the terms of use. They just say
Right.
fine and get the data and do it. So it's
Hmm.
only you have to sign that you're not going to do something bad. But you can do, you're capable of doing anything. It just depends, what are you willing to do for it.
Well, and I think this is a huge
Uh,
thing, because a lot of this is you're doing it through consent without realizing it, because I've met very few people in my life who read all the terms and conditions of apps. And even the people who are lawyers and cybersecurity people and stuff will always have that few instances where they were in a hurry and they're like, yeah, I usually read them, but I didn't read at that time. So let's face it, companies are getting away with murder by having these long terms and
and they also
conditions that
change it.
nobody's going to read. And also, if you did
Yeah,
read them and decide, well, I don't want this, you then
you have
can't
no
be
choice.
part of Facebook or this community, or get your tickets to the concert you want to go to or something. You're literally signing all your privacy away just to do business with companies anymore. And it's very, very hard to tell them not
But
to sell it.
I think you don't realize how much you're giving, because
Talk more
people are
about that.
very,
Let's have people understand what they're giving. Maybe they're thinking, okay, I'm just buying tickets to something. So I have an email address, I have a phone number so that they can, text me a reminder. And my credit card. I know they can't sell my credit card, so all right, my phone number, my email. Well, that's already out there. What do I care? What would you say to them?
the main thing is patterns. It's not just the data points, but your supermarket knows you're pregnant before you do,
Oh
because they
yes,
see your patterns change. Your
right.
Facebook knows when you're depressed because of the images that you're putting. There is research about how different profile pictures, colors, if somebody's in depression or not. Do
There
you know
was
if
a
you're going
study.
through?
I just want to throw this in, but there was a study, and it was U.S. based. But credit card companies know 23 months before you do if you're getting a divorce, because of habit changes and pattern changes. These have been studied. It's not occasional instances. So when you talk about patterns, you're not just talking about, oh, this person likes Taylor Swift or, or Chris Stapleton. You're talking about patterns of
It means, yeah.
things that are leading indicators of something that you do or that is going to happen to you that you don't even know yet because you don't realize you're in a pattern.
And some people they try to like to think to re like understand how the system works, but they
Mhm.
get it wrong. For example, if you're about to get divorced and you want to take a loan and they ask you, are you divorced? And you're not divorced yet, but you're thinking, I'll say I'm divorced because it's the beginning of my new life and I'm independent, I'm control of my own life. Like, yes, I'm divorced. And then they decline because they think if somebody is divorced, he has like a risk. Because
Mhm.
they now they see you through a different risk profile, for example,
Right.
or a credit card loans. If you tell somebody, I want to get a loan, but I just want it because I want to like close some debt and like real like live like a nice, you'll probably won't get the loan that easily because they think, oh, you can't really manage your business, your financials very well, so maybe we don't give it to you. But
Right.
if you just say, I want to go on a fancy trip or I want to buy a Ferrari, they'll say, here's the money, because they think you know how to live your life, you know how to calculate you just want
Mhm.
to something good.
Well,
That's why we're here.
and you bring up a good point because the average person, if we think of a bell curve, there's people who are, uh, you know, sociopathic when it comes to lying. They can just lie with no qualms. And the bulk of people don't want to lie about things. They're like, okay, well, I'm going to tell the truth, because that's what we're supposed to do as good humans, right? But
Yeah.
without realizing that what the data they're given, I like to think of it this way. It's almost like your data it's not just truthful information, but it's being turned into ones and zeros to compare you to a table that's going to say yes or no to you. And it's not, they don't care about the story. They care about the ones and zeros that your data tells them of how you're scoring. And so, what advice do you have for people who say, well, I don't want to lie? Like the example you just gave, maybe it really is to consolidate debt. And they're thinking, well, that's honest. And isn't that a good thing? I'm showing I'm responsible. But, if telling them that, I want to buy a new car or something like that, also, doesn't that mean that they're going to want to give the loan to a car dealership? But let's just say you give them another reason you want to, take your family on vacation. People feel they're lying if they say that. What advice would you have from being on the other side of the data
Yeah.
to give them a different perspective so they can make an informed decision?
Well, they can think about it like chess. Nobody's just asking you questions, for the fun of it, because they know that every question they ask you, less and less people are going to cooperate. They're just going to say, "Oh, I'm too tired. I'm too busy for this crap. I'm not going to
Mhm.
answer all these questions." So they're carefully selecting which questions they're going to ask you, and then they have a huge database with all the answers, and then they calculate what if somebody answered like this or like that. What happened 2 years later? What? So uh, it's like an opening book for chess. So
Mhm.
anything you answer is going to put you in a specific bucket for them. And it's very hard out of that. So even if your situation changes in a few months, you'll still be the same in the same bucket, like what you answered 6 months ago. So
You
you
bring up
have
a
an
really good
advantage
point, and
today.
you bring up a really good point, and
Yeah.
I think this is particularly true for company, for people who live in countries like America and stuff, where independence and being, and having your unique lifestyle and your choices is so highly valuable and so revered as opposed to countries that are more communal and you're fitting in. And I think there's such a strong sense of individuality that people think,
Mhm.
but I'm just answering honestly because this is how I'm living. So what you're saying is just remember that every question you answer is only being asked so they can decide if you belong in this box or this box or whether you like it or not, you're being put in a box. So like the less you volunteer, the more you get to keep your anonymity outside of their evaluation system is maybe a good way to say it.
Uh, First of all, I think it's good to be unique. A lot of people want to be unique, and they are
Mhm.
unique, and it's fine. There is a box for unique people, and you'll be in that box. And I think today we have ChatGPT, which
Mhm.
is one of the good things that it has seen it. It has seen all the internet. So you can actually ask, this is the form I'm asked to fill. why are they asking this?
Mm.
What values are going to put me in different buckets, and what does it mean? So if I'm playing this game, I need to know the rules of the game. Why are they asking? What would most people say and why?
Right.
And there are things that, you talk about truth or lying, but something may be very relevant for you right now, but maybe in 3 months it's going to be different. So if they ask you when you're about to get a loan for a car or something, if you are currently in a stable relationship or something, I don't know if they can ask that, but if they ask something like that, and so this
Or they
loan is
generally
maybe
they'll ask, are you married, single, divorced, or something like that. So,
okay, but if you're taking a loan for like 36 months, that might change,
hmm
but you're still going to be in this bucket.
hmm
So, you have to know what's the implications of answering. And for every insurance company, for example, these things will put you in a different bucket and give you a different price because that's how they price according to their own statistics. So it's good to
hmm
shop around and see if your specific bucket is cheaper or more expensive somewhere else.
That you bring up a
Uh,
good point, and I think one of the things that Americans and Europeans and well, people everywhere, frankly, value, but particularly, we have a predominantly American audience here. I will just say that one of the things that's most highly valued is privacy. So I think maybe a new way of thinking of it is when you're being asked all those questions on a form, that's a good place to keep a lot of your personal life private. They're not asking you those for your health the way a good friend would. They're asking you that
um,
to put you in a bucket. So this is a good way to think about, you know what, I'm going to maintain as much privacy and anonymity as I can there. They don't have to know all the reasons. It's not their business and they're not using it for my welfare. So I will
no, they're
be
looking for
honest to a
leverage.
point, but I don't have to. What is that? I had a business colleague who used to say it's called compulsive self-disclosure. When you say more about yourself than is needed, it's like just if you're asked a yes or no question, say yes or no. Don't give a long explanation, giving away a lot of details about yourself that are unnecessary to somebody who's not a close friend or family member or somebody that you know has your best interest. So avoid compulsive self-disclosure on these forms and just answer them honestly, but you don't need to tell them, you know, all the details because it's not going to work for you. It's usually working against you.
And some things you don't have to tell them at all. Um,
Mm,
I'll,
mhm,
I'll give you I'll give you like a short example of something that people usually don't think about is that we did a scan with POVA with my system
mhm.
for a garage, a big garage next to a big office building. And in 1 week of data, we unintentionally surfaced all the people that are cheating together
Oh my
because you can see
goodness.
the patterns of going in and out at different times, and it becomes very obvious that something there is very strange.
Oh, that
Uh,
is fascinating. That's so and you say unintentionally. How did you guys who spotted it and how did they spot it? I mean, how did that become
we
apparent?
wanted we wanted to look at the anomalies in how people go in and out, and sometimes people would buy a parking spot for the whole day, but 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock they would go home, and that parking lot would be empty, and they can resell that for like evening crowds or going to
Mhm,
restaurants or whatever. So they
mhm,
wanted to check that if they have this policy and they want to sell these places again for that day, like what's going to be the capacity, when, which days, is it close to like if there's events in town or things like this. And then we saw, all these different cars that come and go at different
Oh,
times
that's
together.
interesting. That's interesting.
And
That reminds me, there was a town I lived in. I won't get into the details, but a town I was living in, and I just moved in and bought a house there. And across the street, um, you know, uh, when I would work, there was 2 days a week I worked from home, and I there was always this police car parked across the street in the driveway, and I said, "This is so great! I've got a police officer as a neighbor," so I felt so safe. And later I found out that there was a police officer having an affair with the wife of the people who lived there when the husband was gone at work. And I thought, oh my goodness, there you go. So that's not a digital version of it, but it's very similar to things aren't always what they appear, I think is what we learned from that.
exactly.
You've seen a lot of things. What are that was an interesting story. What are a couple of the craziest stories you've seen being in the trenches with all this data?
Uh, 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 yeah, as you mentioned, there's a lot of a lot of crazy times when,
Hmm.
let's say, once it was confirmed that somebody is stealing from a company, and he was
Is
one
this
of
like
the
embezzlement of
managers.
some kind?
Yeah,
Some kind
yeah,
of embezzlement?
actually stealing, yeah,
Mhm.
asking customers, to divert payments, doing a
Ah,
lot of different things.
okay.
But he was like a strong CEO of the company, and
Hmm.
I was called by the board of directors. So I had to walk in with like a court order that I can look at the data into like a room or with 100 people all looking at me like they want to kill me. Like
You're a
their
threat.
beloved
You are a
CEO.
threat. Yes.
I felt like in danger. Yeah, it's
Mm. Wow.
um, there is a lot of times, there are companies that they think everything is fine, that nothing is going on, that they're in control of everything because they can't really understand the data.
Hmm.
And then something happens. And like I say, POVA is the most boring company in the world. Until you think somebody's stealing from you.
Okay.
Uh,
And this is your company, POVA.ai. Hmm.
yeah, we just for point of view analytics, which basically
Right.
means if something small is wrong in your data, it's
Mm-hmm.
it's usually so insignificant and so small in relation to all the other data points you have that the only way to see it is to put it in perspective. So
Mm-hmm.
if me and you are meeting every Thursday under the bridge and we throw dice and we always
Hmm.
get a six, after a while it gets strange. After like 200 times,
Right.
how
Right.
likely is that to
Yeah.
naturally occur?
The odds are so against it. Yeah. So,
Yeah, it just becomes, so low that there must be a good explanation, but it's a good question to ask. Like, why does this happen?
mm-hmm.
And and when you go to any organization, when you start really looking at the organization for every possible point of view, and there are millions of them,
Mm-hmm.
you start telling them things about their company that they never realized. They had no idea that they're losing money on all these customers, and that these products actually they lose more inventory for stealing than actually selling it. And there's so many things that they'll rediscover about how their business actually works that it's fascinating.
So,
And
what's an
and
example of something that was really bizarre, in seeing, or something that they weren't expecting and you weren't expecting?
For example, I was working with a medical device company. And
Hmm.
everybody likes to buy, these gadgets that you can put on you, and then it detects something with your heart rate or with
Hmm.
your something else, and it will tell you something meaningful about your health. And
Right.
and the way they do that is that they actually need to buy a lot of data, a lot of patient data, and run
So they're going
different
to those
models.
data brokers we were talking about. Yes.
Exactly. And they have to like anonymize data, yeah. And
Uh-huh.
and then what happens is that they discovered that their models are not very good because they're buying data which is not good. It's a lot of it because if you want to buy a data and that broker doesn't have the data, sometimes they'll make some pretty nice data for you.
So you don't even need
Random
an
data.
AI to hallucinate. You've got data companies doing it for you,
Yeah, yeah.
really.
They'll sell you data. And a lot of time, even people with small businesses, they will buy like enriched data from a
Hmm.
broker. And this enrichment, sometimes it's what we call synthetic, which means somebody just like made it up and just sold them
Mm.
nice values. And
Right.
they actually saw that when they tried to trace back why the product is not working properly, they saw that they got information for the same patient, patient X,
Hmm.
from two different vendors, and it wasn't the same.
Mm.
So they didn't know what to do. They had millions of records that are overlapping and are different for the
Hmm.
same patients. So
Wow.
what like just take and blend them together into like averages or take one of them or take the other one. They had
Hmm.
no idea what to do with it. So we actually tested to see which data is more reliable, when statistically more likely to be real. And
Okay.
that's what they use to train their models and actually improve them.
Okay. Because
So
you could
I,
tell
I
by the
guess what
patterns
makes
that it
things
was
great.
synthetic because there were only so many repetitive patterns
Yeah,
for,
actually, people are very bad in creating random data. They're really, really bad.
yeah.
If you let somebody sit on Excel and create random data, or
Hmm.
just randomize with Excel, it will look totally different. And if the way it naturally occurs is like a third way of looking totally different. There was a
Okay. And so
professor, I think he
your
actually
systems
made,
could spot what's real that is, I'm sure the most
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
the most unlikely is probably the truth, right? And then the others look they're more repetitive or something. But your
I
system
think
could spot.
when somebody makes up, it's usually, let's say, between 1 and 10. They'll usually put like 4, 6, 7, 3, 4, 7. They
Mhm.
won't put so many like 0, 0, 0, 0, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, which what
Right,
happens in reality. Uh,
right.
so you can spot that, and statistically you can spot that. And where will like normal people see that is that now a lot of cities, municipalities, and other businesses, they have a lot of disclosures. They disclose a lot of data. You can see City of New York, I don't know, 44 million transactions disclosed. Chicago, other cities, and nobody can really
And
go
I'm
through
sorry,
that
was that
data.
from a data breach, or are you talking about from some other
No, no,
way?
no. It's
That's been
public
shared.
disclosures.
Oh, I'm seeing what you're saying. You mean
Yeah,
like housing purchases and things like that that they publish?
there's a lot of things that
Mhm.
they say you want data, we'll give you data, and then open a fire hose and give you billions of records. And
Mhm.
because nobody can really, even if they sit with Excel and coffee and they say, okay, let's figure out what the city has done for me or what's going on
Mhm.
there. They don't really have the tools to understand what's going on in that data and to find all these patterns, like we said, with the parking lot, with cheating people. So
Mhm.
if you actually take power tools and you go through that data and you see some amazing things, you see some things that definitely somebody should go and ask them back, like, what the hell were you thinking when you did this, with our
Mhm.
money or things like this?
Like what's an example of something that would surprise people?
For example, there are different ways to disclose things. So, for example, to really disclose something, you have to have like a end-to-end, like who bought something and from who. And
Like
so a
a
lot of
like a
times,
like a car through DMV or like a home through a realtor
yeah,
thing, something
yeah,
like that,
but
transactional. Okay. Hmm.
yeah. So when it's your data and you're buying a car, you're doing something. Yeah, all your data is there and the car is there and everything meets like the whole way. But when like there's a public disclosure of data, a lot of times you'll have like a department is
Hmm.
buying a type of product. So it's
Okay.
like it's like when you're trying to look at the rain patterns and somebody just brings you a bucket and say, this is how much rain we got. So you,
Okay.
you can't really understand anything about how it's dispersed. But
Hmm.
still there are a lot of different patterns that you will see uh, of how things happen together. And there is some things about like geoprofiling. Did you look at geoprofiling before here in the show or?
Oh, we've talked. I've talked a little bit about it. Explain that for everybody.
Yeah, if you talk about it, usually it's like a bad actor, but or somebody trying to do something that is not a psychopath. He has feelings, so he cares about himself and preserving himself. So he will want to do something that he's not sure about, close enough to his area so he feels in control, but far enough that it's not too close to him.
You're talking about picking a victim or something like that.
Yeah, picking a victim,
Hmm.
or doing some act of vandalism or doing
Right.
something. Uh, and then if they do it a few times, then you can triangulate where you live because every time they give you information, what's too far or too close to my house,
Mm. Yeah.
and you don't
And
know their own preference. But if you have a few points and you triangulate it, you can pinpoint their apartment building.
oh my goodness. Wow. That's something that most people don't know and stuff. So that helps law enforcement hone in on a couple of square blocks or something to then look at
Yeah,
residents
and they do
there.
that, and they do that.
Hmm.
And
That's
another thing,
fascinating.
another data thing, for example, like that universities sometimes do
Hmm.
is, for example, they calculated that you need to be at least, 70% on their entrance exam to
Hmm.
survive it for the first like year.
Okay.
But then they know that if they do the test for 70, a lot of people that are 60 will use their support system and friends and smarter friends and they'll push them to pass the 70. So even now, if naturally they wouldn't pass, they make them pass. And then they have a wave of people that, yeah, they make it to the 70, and then within within the first year or at the end of the first year, when their friends are already tired of them, they'll fail. So they'll actually calculate, let's say, to make the entrance exam at 80, not because they need 80, but because if the 70 people work hard enough with their support system, they'll get to 80, and then they'll pass, and then they'll be their own
Um,
70. So there's a
oh, I
lot of
see.
things
There's
that
like a critical mass factor there. They get far enough past the
because
baseline.
that
Hmm.
people think that they have an edge because they have like smart friends that can help them,
Right.
and they can they can use their elbows and get in, but everybody's doing it.
Yeah. Well, that's the
Everybody,
other thing too. That comes back to you think you're unique, but you're actually doing something. There's 8 billion people on the planet. So a lot of people are doing things similarly to you. Even if you think, how many times have people come up with an idea for a product and then they see it on TV or on the web and you're like, I invented that product. There's nothing new under the sun is an old saying. It's kind of like, if something's invented, it's invented by multiple people in multiple places who don't even know each other, never met, and never talk, but there's this simultaneous creation that happens, that
yeah,
people think they're 1 in 8 billion uniquely the only person doing it, and there's a whole psychology around that for us to learn from.
we act in a we are a pattern matching machine. We
Mm,
identify patterns
mm-hmm,
even when they're not there,
mm-hmm,
so we can make them up. But sometimes we identify pattern, then we try to match our rhythm to the pattern, and that makes us very predictable.
right. Yeah,
Uh,
and even if you're trying to hide all that and not leave clues, you're going to. Let me ask you a question related to that then. What's the smallest clue you've ever seen that turned into a massive fraud case?
there was something funny.
Mhm.
It's a company that they buy parts and then they do something with them, and then they resell the product.
Okay.
And the owners thought that everything is perfect
Mhm.
in that facility, and sometimes they have to send back the parts to the manufacturer because it wasn't needed or there's a problem, and then
Mhm.
there's like all calculation, like financial calculation around that,
Mhm.
and then they spotted 1 month that they actually returned more products than they bought,
Which is not feasible, exactly.
which means that the whole perception of reality is wrong. It's like when finding out, if you're married to somebody and is cheating on you,
Mhm.
the
Mhm.
second that you find out and you see like that something that you can't explain in a normal way,
Mhm.
uh, and then it hits you. And I think it's very important, not just your data, but what kind of people you surround yourself with.
Well,
So
so
are you
real quick, so in
surrounded?
that case, you're saying that 1 month, it wasn't just that 1 month, but it what that 1 month did was bring to light that this has been going on undetected, and
That was the one
that
clue
was the
that
one
whoever
clue
did
that
it
kind of
forgot to
like
look
pulled
at
the
that.
thread of the whole thing.
Exactly. It
Wow.
was enough for them to call me. And
How much,
then
how far back had it gone, or like how big was it if you can paint us a general picture since we
uh,
don't know who they were?
a lot of times the mechanics of these things is that somebody will get to some temptation, and
Mm-hmm.
then he will think or she will think, uh, I'm entitled. I work too hard. I'm the only one here. Everybody went home. I can take home, if let's say there are even something small like a tea from the kitchen or something, I'll
Mm-hmm.
take home something. I'll continue work and I can drink that.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next day they'll think maybe I'll take more. And then, so
I'll,
it
I'll add a
escalates.
pen and I'll add this and then an electronic device or something, right? It's just,
Yeah, it escalates very, very fast. And usually it doesn't get caught because of analytics. It gets caught because of whistleblowers, just because everybody see around it that it's just so much, so over the top that everybody's talking about it.
yeah,
But that usually take like a year and a half until
yeah,
it really spirals out of control. So, I mean, you could catch it after, a month or two when you just small signs are starting, because
right,
you see there's something is brewing there and it's growing. There are things that are stable. It's just
right.
people doing things in specific ways that maybe are not good or maybe, but that's like usually controls issue or
Well, and
policy.
let's talk about that for a second. When somebody is stealing, let's say money inside a huge company, right? They're siphoning off or they're embezzling in some way. How can how do they hide it in plain sight for so long? Because very often when you're called in, things have been going on for months or years. How are they able to hide it? What's going on there? This is like a CSI episode.
Yeah. First of all, I want to divide it into two. One is today a lot of hackers are not just coming in, robbing something, and going out.
Hmm.
They're going in and then they listen on the email communication and they start changing bank account details and they send email from almost the same email as the customer, and they're actually asking the CFO, to wire them money and everything seems to be fine until the real vendor, real customer calls and say, "Where's my money?" It's like, "We sent it to you. No, you didn't." And then
Hmm.
they see that something was happening, and they
Right.
didn't realize that somebody is changing blocks in their infrastructure.
You bring up a good
Uh,
point because one client that I was working with, they had a huge embezzlement. What had happened was there was an email thread going back and forth of about a dozen people. And because they had hacked into the network, they didn't take anything. They were totally in stealth mode. Nobody could see them or know they were there. But what they did was they saw this email that was leading towards a big deal. They sent a reply all from an email account they had hacked into, and they copied themselves on the outside, an
mm,
email that they had put together for themselves. So now they're in the chain, and now they're seeing the whole conversation that went on for weeks, and nobody
oh.
caught that this is now this group of 13 people now includes a bad actor, and because some of the other people were outside the company, even if you get those alerts that say you're sending this outside the company, they're like, well, we know we're working with our lawyers or PR. It's about an M&A deal, and nobody caught that there was this person that shouldn't be in there, and it led to loss of millions of dollars. And so the way they get in stealth mode is no joke. I just want to point that out what you're talking about, and this is happening every day in every part of the globe.
So I'll just say that it's much easier to get into people's systems than they think. You
Yes.
know, Sometimes they sit and
Personal, if you're a small business owner, it's true, definitely true, because you're the most targeted. If your own personal Yahoo, Gmail, your whatever you use on your personal and in corporations, it's true all across the board, right?
if you sit in Starbucks,
Yeah.
use your own internet.
Yeah, which
If
means you
you
should
not just
use your
Starbucks, any place, any public network, because you don't know if Starbucks free Wi-Fi is the guy sitting next to you
Mhm.
or is it Starbucks.
Right. I've actually
Um,
used that as an example because a lot of people will like I can't remember what Starbucks real one is now. It either has an underscore or doesn't have an underscore, but there was an example of somebody sitting in a Starbucks who just all they did was replace the space with a underscore or the underscore with a space.
yeah.
So it looks like Starbucks Wi-Fi. It looks like what they always see, and people were logging into it and doing shopping on Amazon and everything like that. And that was a field day for the bad guy sitting in there. And I always like to say hackers love to drink lattes too, so they're sitting right next to you. Just because you're in a Starbucks, you don't want to mistake that for meaning, oh well, I'm in. And
Yeah.
also they don't even have to be in on the same day as you. A lot of times, if they're coming in and hacking into
Yeah, they can leave a device. They can do
they can
something.
hack a
They can sit.
device
They can
and
sit in
get
the
all the
public
records for the
parking
last,
lot.
weeks and
And,
months. And so it could have been from 6 weeks ago you were in there. So
and
you gotta be aware to your point about data, that data is really, even if it was
and
something you
people
did
think
2 months
that
ago, it could be, somebody could
yeah,
just be getting it today to use against you.
and people think it just because they keep their password safe, it means they're protected or a really complex password. But
Hmm.
every time you go into the email or every time you go to your CRM, they don't ask you to put your password in because they remember your password to make it more convenient for you. And they have like
Hmm.
a session ID or session token. And if that hacker takes that session token,
Yeah,
they can keep being logged in without knowing your password, and they can just be already logged into all your systems, and they can do whatever they want. So
that
going
is so
back to
true.
your question about how people steal, they will not just go to the cash register, just take money, look at the camera, say hi, and go away. But they will do more sneaky things. For
Yeah.
example, if there is a big customer, and they'll tell the customer, you know what, I can give you 50% off, but you'll meet me in the parking lot and give me 10% in cash.
Hmm.
So you can't detect that, but the pattern will change. Why
Hmm.
this customer, the pricing all changed? Why all the customers
Yeah.
of this specific rep started drifting? Uh, what happens with the inventory, how inventory moves? So you'll see that changes in the patterns of how things happen. And that's what I meant about having a DNA of a fish, in a cat or something.
Mhm.
You'll see that, yeah, it's not anomalies in terms of these numbers are usually 1 to 10 and now it's 10,000. Yeah, it's an anomaly. It's big. Yeah. No,
Mhm.
nobody cheats like this. They'll catch him after 5 minutes.
Right.
But it's creating a different kind of relationship with an entity, external entity a lot of times, or internal entity, and
Right.
making the data look real, but it's hiding. It's like a double
Double set of books.
double wall, yeah,
Hmm.
or something that there is a gap that you cannot see, and this
Hmm.
gap can get bigger and bigger,
I see.
and it's a lot of time returns to who are the people that you're surrounded by. So if you are in a very hostile environment, you should be very, very careful. But
Hmm.
you can be all very paranoid or remove yourself from that environment and make it, there is this like a joke about this security expert that went to live in a remote place and he set up his Wi-Fi at home. And just because, he's a kind of a cool cyber guy, he named his Wi-Fi Hack Me If You Can. And he woke up in the morning and he saw that the name was changed to challenge accepted.
That is a good one. That's a good one. I love that one. That's
Uh,
great. Well, we've probably scared the bejesus out of a lot of people here. So let's give them a couple of tips then for data privacy. Let's talk about what can people do to take back as much control as possible of their own data and it getting shared and protect themselves from people seeing things that they don't want them to see. What are the two or three pieces of advice and words of wisdom you would give our listeners?
I would definitely look for automated ways to remove myself from these data brokers because they have to remove you. They are legal entities. A lot of them, they are not dark web. If you ask them and you follow up, they will remove you. So a lot of people who buy this data will not have your data.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes, you can change your phone, number, you can change your emails, you can change different things and like deassociate yourself with some of the things. You be in a good environment that is not hostile, not be interesting, not be too interesting sometimes. But some people they are high profile. They cannot, and if you are high profile, have a very clear separation, like airtight, air-gapped environment between your
Right.
professional life, private life.
And let's just
There's a lot
explain
of,
that because in our
CEOs.
field we talk about that. So an air gap for all of you playing along at home here that aren't familiar with it, it's where you're creating that literally what it sounds like a space between your personal world and your public world or your private world and your public world, if you will, so that you're trying to create a bubble. Your whole life cannot be in a bubble, but you're trying to have an inner sanctum of some kind that is where your really private information is kept that can't be associated with you through all the public data that's
I'll
out
give you an example. When we scan data, I'm trying to find, is there a manipulator in the system
there. Mm-hmm.
to protect this data and the scan report itself? We will bring a physical machine to the company. We will
Mm-hmm.
put it there, and it's disconnected from the internet. It has no network access. It will get the data with a memory stick
Okay.
inside. It's not connected to anything. It will
Mm-hmm.
create an encrypted report that the chairman or CEO can put his own like really long key to decrypt it and see it. I can create a report that I don't see, that I
Right.
have no idea what's going on there.
Mm-hmm.
So this is what people do when they care about privacy.
That's great.
So
No,
if you're
that's
not
really.
doing this,
Mm-hmm. Well, and you brought up something before too. Like, I was doing that. I was traveling recently and I wanted to see something online. And every time I go to a website, and I've got my security level set on high, as you might expect for someone doing what I do. But I also, you know, a new website and everything pops up, to agree to the terms. I'm always going in and those extra steps of turning off everything but essential. And when I clicked on this one, it actually showed over 700 partners that they share the data with. And that's exactly, and then each of them can share it with more. So suddenly think about that, the exponential curve of 730, and then they have it and they share with you. And even your own internet service providers can, sell your data all the time. That's very
Everybody is
common.
selling your data.
And nobody thinks about this unless you are in the industry and realize it. And the first time you learn about it, you think you've got to be kidding. And then we get used to it and we're kind of, desensitized to it in our field. But everybody, needs to know this who's a consumer or a small business owner or working corporate, that privacy is there. So consistency, I think, is another key thing, right? Because it's that one time. I swear I got so much spam email after one time when I was in a hurry and I didn't go in and I was trying to hit, you know, customize, and because of the way my mouse was delayed on a Wi-Fi, it it hit accept and I was like, "Ugh, I can't pull this back." And that one time I got such an bump in spam email coming into me and I was like, "See, there you go." And so consistency is a big part of protection, isn't it? Just, you can't be 50% of the time you're protecting yourself and the other 50% you're not, because you're not going to win that way.
I mean, for example, I'm not very paranoid because if I was, I wouldn't be able to do anything. Uh,
Okay.
but some things, for example, I have like an Android emulator on
Okay.
on a PC somewhere connected to a VPN, and
Hmm.
I connect to it from my phone. So anything I do on that browser is is not associated with me in
You
terms
don't
of
even go through
location.
your internet service provider. You go through your cellular carrier to
So
have a higher level of protection, which
so
is
you're just
why you need to do it at Starbucks, everybody, or wherever you're out. If you're out, do not get on public Wi-Fi. Use
bring your own internet.
even if it costs you more, even if you have a data plan, just try not to go to the sites try not to do things that require a lot of data then. But still, even if you pay $2, $5, $10, think about the consequences of not. This is where you get to make decisions about your own privacy and online safety. If it costs you $10, that's $10 in your privacy and not using a public Wi-Fi that's going to have captured information about you that you don't want to share with the rest of the world. So
And
not
another
everybody
very
wants the same
important,
level of privacy and security,
yeah.
but you've got to decide what do you want and and then commit to the trade-offs you're going to make. And most of them aren't that big. It's the extra three steps to turn off to turn off the share the data or agree to their cookies and all of that. It's that extra step to clear your cache of cookies and you're and log out so you don't have you don't have session tokens. These things
One point,
are difficult,
one
right?
point is that shared computers, sometimes you have like
Oh yeah.
grandmother and she has all her savings and bank and everything. And then
Mm-hmm.
her grandkids come and they play on the computer and they start clicking randomly on every site that pops up.
Mm.
And they're installing so many malwares and viruses and
On
everything in
grandma.
5 minutes on grandma's computer. And it's just I would get them a different computer. I don't know. Don't
Right.
touch my financial computer. It's like sacred. That's my like business. Like don't touch it.
Right. Right.
Have your own like phone or whatever.
Right. You can do
Don't
it on your
mix
phone. That's why you have a phone, so
business
you
and
can do it.
pleasure.
Exactly. So
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
good advice for grandma and grandpa.
yeah, yeah.
That's
Feel
great.
feel good not to let anybody touch the computer that has your finance or anything.
Yeah,
You be careful not let anybody get into it. It's like your company's computer. It's
right. Well,
sacred.
that's a
It's
really good point. And for people like your own finances, your taxes and everything, if you've got those on your computer and you're on your network, your Wi-Fi network at home, and that's the same one your teenage kids' friends come over and do gaming on, and that your smart TV is connected to, and your smart fridge, and gosh knows what else. Your level of security just went from high the medium to the lowest it can be, even though you're investing in all these security software and everything for your laptop, you've put yourself in an insecure environment. You got to think
th-
about your environment and your device, right? And your behaviors. Your behaviors, your device, and your environment, right? That's a really good way to think about it.
that's a really, really key point because you're always secure as the weakest link in your chain.
Yeah.
And a lot of websites, let's say, used to get hacked all the time. Why? Because they would install this small component that does, this counter at the bottom of the page. And if
Hmm.
this component gets compromised, then all your site is compromised.
Right.
And if you have some cheap router, from somewhere in your home and it has a back door, the second somebody hears about this back door, there are people just trying, going to every IP address and trying to see who is open for that. That's
Right.
how a lot of cameras are online because people just do keep it admin or admin 1 2 3 4, and they never change the factory settings.
Right. The
And
admin,
anybody
the
can,
yeah, in fact, the password's still on the label on the device.
it's on
It's
the
not,
box, yeah, and you can go to the shop and see what's the password.
yeah,
And they don't know that their home cameras, like security cameras, are online, and anybody can go in and see if they're home alone, if they're not
right.
home alone. So yeah, change
Yeah,
the defaults
right.
and buy
So
something good.
increase your privacy and think about it holistically. And you can't do super safe things in one area and not do the same protections in another and
Yeah,
expect to stay that safe. You're kind of you're disabling all that good work you've done by lowering it. So just think of, is this I guess a good question everybody should be asking themselves, is this consistent with the security level and privacy level that I want and value, that I value and want for myself and my family and my business? And you got to just consistently make that answer aligned with your goals so that you can live a safer, better life, because that's what it's all about, right?
yeah.
That's so great. So this is really great. Thank you so much for these interesting insights and great advice. So for people who want to learn more about you, where can they reach you?
They can go to the POVA website, which is POVA.ai, or just look me up in LinkedIn or something.
Okay.
I'm
And that's
usually
Roy
friendly.
Daya, Daya, and you're on LinkedIn and they can connect with you there. That's
Yeah.
great. That's awesome.
So
Roy, thank you so much. And coming to us from a different time zone. I appreciate you coming in and being with us. Thank you for giving us the insights and really interesting stories about data and what it tells us. We got to turn you loose on Las Vegas or Macau and have you tell us some insights there. That would be a great adventure.
there are some very interesting
Okay,
stories
we're
about
having
that
you back
area
on that one, that's
next
for sure.
time.
That
Yeah.
sounds great. All right, you heard it here first. So thank you, Roy, and thank you everybody for tuning in.
Thank you.
If you've learned some things here, please put them into place so that you can be smarter and safer online. And please share this with grandma and with everyone else who needs to know Roy's great tips for you today. We appreciate you being with us. Would love it if you would like, share, or subscribe to help us reach more people and help them be safer. And until next time, you stay safe out there.